The silence of the desert night pressed against Harper Preston's ears like cotton soaked in ice water, as she huddled beside the circle of stones where flames had died hours ago, leaving nothing but ash and the faint ghost of warmth that mocked her trembling body. She wrapped her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, teeth chattering so violently she worried they might crack, while overhead the Arizona stars blazed with an indifference that felt almost cruel in their beauty. It was October of 1882, and Castle Dome, the copper mining settlement she had been traveling toward, still lay somewhere beyond the dark ridges to the west. Her wagon had lost a wheel 15 miles back, and the elderly couple who had given her passage had decided to wait for morning light before attempting repairs. But Harper, stubborn and desperate to reach her aunt before winter set in, had accepted the loan of their mare and pushed ahead. The horse had thrown a shoe within an hour, and rather than risk laming the animal, Harper had made camp in this small canyon, thinking herself clever to find shelter from the wind. She had not been clever about gathering enough firewood. She had not been clever about anything, really, and now she was paying for it with cold that sank into her bones like water into dry earth. The flint and steel sat useless in her numb fingers. She had been trying to restart the fire for what felt like hours, but her hands refused to cooperate, and the tinder remained stubbornly unlit. Harper closed her eyes and tried to think warm thoughts, but all she could see was her mother's face the day she died, pale and worried, making Harper promise to reach California, to find Aunt Margaret, to not waste away in St. Louis waiting for a life that would never come. That had been 8 months ago, and Harper had been traveling ever since, her funds dwindling with each passing week until she had been forced to rely on the kindness of strangers. The sound of hoofbeats startled her so badly she nearly screamed. Her eyes flew open, and she scrambled to her feet, swaying slightly as blood rushed from her head. A rider emerged from the shadows at the canyon's mouth, silhouetted against the starlight, tall and broad-shouldered on a dark horse that moved with the careful precision of an animal that knew its business. "Easy now," a man's voice called out, low and steady. "I mean no harm, miss." Harper's hand went to the small knife at her belt, though she knew it would do little good if this stranger had ill intentions. "Stay back," she managed to say through chattering teeth. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his hands visible as he approached. "You are shaking hard enough to start an earthquake," he observed, and there was no mockery in his tone, only concern. "That fire of yours looks deader than last year's dreams." As he came closer, the starlight caught his features. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard and eyes that seemed kind even in the darkness. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn denim trousers, a shirt that had seen better days, a leather vest, and a hat that had protected his face from countless days under the brutal desert sun. "I can start it again," Harper lied, her pride flaring despite her desperate circumstances. "I just need a moment." The cowboy tilted his head slightly, studying her, then glanced at the cold fire pit. "How long have you been needing that moment?" When Harper did not answer, he moved past her toward the dead fire, kneeling to examine the setup. "I am Garrett Irving," he said as he worked, pulling kindling from the meager pile she had assembled. "I have been trailing a lost calf for the Copper Queen Ranch, though I suspect the little fool got himself eaten by a mountain lion about 6 miles back. I saw your fire earlier before it went out and thought I would check to see if you needed help." "I do not need help," Harper said automatically, then immediately felt foolish as another violent shiver racked her body. Garrett looked up at her, and she could see amusement in his eyes, but also genuine concern. Pride is a fine thing to have, miss, but it makes poor fuel for a fire. You are going to freeze if you keep standing there telling lies while your lips turn blue." Something about his straightforward manner cut through Harper's defenses. She sank back down to the ground, wrapping her arms around herself. "Harper," she said quietly. "Harper Preston." "Well, Miss Preston, I am going to build you a new fire, and I am going to stay until morning to make sure you do not freeze to death out here. You can argue with me if you like, but I have 3 sisters back in Texas, and I learned a long time ago that arguing with a determined woman is about as useful as shouting at the wind. Difference is, I am bigger than you and I know I am right, so we are going to do this my way." Despite her misery, Harper felt a small smile tug at her lips. "You are very presumptuous." "I prefer to think of it as practical," Garrett said, already moving around the campsite with purpose. He gathered the kindling she had tried to use and set it aside, then walked into the darkness. Harper heard the sound of branches breaking, and within minutes he returned with an armful of dead mesquite wood, the kind that burned hot and long. She watched as he rebuilt the fire properly, arranging the wood in a way that would catch and hold. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, under conditions far worse than these. He pulled out his own flint and steel, and within moments, a small flame was licking at the tinder. He carefully fed it, coaxing it larger, adding small sticks before graduating to bigger pieces. The fire grew, and with it came warmth that felt like salvation. Harper could not help herself. She leaned forward, holding her hands toward the flames, and a small sound of relief escaped her throat. "Where are you headed?" Garrett asked, settling back on his heels, apparently satisfied with his work. "Castle Dome," Harper said, the feeling slowly returning to her fingers as sharp pins and needles. "My aunt lives there. She runs a boarding house. Margaret Preston." "Older woman, sharp tongue, heart of gold." Harper looked at him in surprise. "You know her?" "Everyone knows Margaret Preston. She has been feeding hungry cowboys and miners for years. Good woman." Garrett stood and walked to his horse, returning with a saddle blanket and a canteen. He handed both to Harper. "Wrap yourself in this. It smells like horse, but it is warm, and drink something. You need to get your insides warmed up too." Harper accepted both gratefully, though she wrinkled her nose at the distinct equine smell of the blanket. The water in the canteen was cool and sweet, and she realized she had been rationing her own supply too carefully. She drank deeply before handing it back. Garrett settled himself on the opposite side of the fire, feeding it another piece of wood. "What are you doing out here alone?" "Castle Dome is still a good day's ride, and that mare of yours looks like she has seen better days." The question was not accusatory, merely curious, and Harper found herself answering honestly. "I was traveling with the Hendersons, an elderly couple heading to Yuma. Their wagon broke down and I thought I could make better time on my own. I borrowed their mare, but she threw a shoe, so I made camp." She paused. "It seemed like a good idea at the time." "Most bad ideas do," Garrett observed. "The desert has a way of punishing good intentions." "Were you planning to travel all night?" "I was planning to reach Castle Dome before dark, but I miscalculated the distance." Harper pulled the blanket tighter. "I am not very good at this." "At what? Surviving? Managing? Any of it?" The admission came out more bitter than she intended. "My mother always handled everything. I just did what I was told and thought that would be enough. Then she died, and I discovered I did not know how to do much of anything useful." Garrett was quiet for a moment, studying her across the flames. "You made it this far from St. Louis. That counts for something." "How did you know I was from St. Louis? You have the look of river cities about you, and you said it without saying it, in the way you talk, the way you carry yourself. This is not your country yet." He tipped his hat back slightly. But it could be, if you gave it a chance. The desert is harsh, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not. Harper considered this, watching the fire dance. The warmth was seeping into her now, replacing the bone-deep cold with something approaching comfort. Her eyelids felt heavy, but she fought against sleep, aware that she was alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere. No matter how kind he seemed, she needed to stay alert. "You should sleep," Garrett said, as if reading her thoughts. "I will keep the fire going and keep watch. Nothing out here is going to bother us except maybe a coyote or two, and they are more scared of the fire than you should be of them. I cannot just fall asleep while you stand guard. That hardly seems fair." "Life is not particularly fair, Miss Preston, as I suspect you already know. But this is not about fair. This is about practical. You are exhausted, cold, and if I am any judge, you have not eaten properly in days. I am none of those things. So you sleep, and come morning, we will ride together to Castle Dome and get you to your aunt. You would do that." "Delay your return to the ranch," Garrett shrugged. "The calf is gone, and I already told the foreman I might be out a few days tracking it. One more day will not make a difference. Besides, I like your aunt. She makes the best apple pie in Arizona Territory, and she never charges me full price. Figure I owe her the favor of delivering her niece in one piece." Despite herself, Harper felt tears prick at her eyes. Kindness from strangers had been rare on her journey, and this simple generosity touched something deep inside her. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks. Just close your eyes before you fall over." Harper lay down, using her own saddle as a pillow and wrapping herself in both her shawl and Garrett's horse blanket. The fire crackled pleasantly, and she could hear Garrett moving quietly, adding more wood, checking on his horse. The sounds were oddly comforting, and despite her determination to stay alert, sleep claimed her within minutes. She woke twice during the night. The first time she found Garrett sitting exactly where he had been, his hat tipped forward but his posture alert, the fire burning steadily. The second time, near dawn, she saw him standing at the canyon's edge, silhouetted against the first gray light of morning, and something about the sight made her heart perform a strange little skip that had nothing to do with cold or fear. When she woke fully, the sun was just cresting the eastern ridges, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The fire had been built up again, and the smell of coffee reached her nose, making her stomach clench with hunger. Garrett was crouched by the flames, tending a small pot balanced on rocks. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee will be ready in a minute. I have some jerky and hardtack if you are hungry. Not fancy, but it will keep you going." Harper sat up, finger combing her hair and trying to look more presentable than she felt. "You did not sleep at all." "I can sleep when I am dead, or when I get back to the ranch and Mrs. Patterson forces me to take a day off, whichever comes first." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Careful, it is hot." The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what Harper needed. She accepted the jerky and hardtack, eating slowly while Garrett broke camp with efficient movements. He checked the mare's hooves, confirming that she definitely needed a new shoe, then transferred Harper's few belongings to his own horse. "You will ride with me," he said. "Caesar here is strong enough to carry two, and we will make better time. We can arrange to have the mare picked up and brought in. The Hendersons will understand." Harper hesitated. Riding double meant sitting very close to this man she had just met, but the alternative was walking, and she knew she would never make it. "All right," she agreed. Garrett mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. Harper settled onto Caesar's back, acutely aware of how close she was to Garrett's broad shoulders. She did not know where to put her hands until he reached back and guided them to his waist. "Hold on," he said simply. "If you fall off, I will feel terrible, and my mother will be disappointed in me from clear across in Texas." Harper found herself smiling at that. "We cannot disappoint your mother." "No, we certainly cannot. That woman raised 4 boys and 3 girls while my father drove cattle to Kansas every summer. If I have learned anything in life, it is that you do not cross a strong woman. They will always win." They rode out of the canyon as the sun climbed higher, and Harper watched the desert transform in the morning light. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, all red rock and endless sky and plants that had learned to survive against impossible odds. She understood those plants better now than she had before. As they rode, Garrett talked, his voice a pleasant rumble that she could feel as much as hear. He told her about the Copper Queen Ranch, one of the largest operations in the territory, running cattle across thousands of acres of desert and scrubland. He had been working there for 2 years, since leaving his family's ranch in Texas to make his own way in the world. "Why did you leave?" Harper asked, the rhythm of the horse's gait making conversation feel natural. "Needed to prove I could make it on my own terms," Garrett said. "My older brother inherited the ranch as is proper, and my younger brother partnered with him. I could have stayed, worked for them, but I wanted to know I could stand on my own feet, answer to my own choices." "Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Harper said softly. "I feel like I have been following other people's plans my whole life. My father wanted me to marry well. My mother wanted me to be respectable. I wanted—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "What did you want?" "I do not know. I never gave myself permission to figure it out." They rode in silence for a while after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that felt like understanding rather than awkwardness. Harper found herself relaxing against Garrett's back, her initial self-consciousness fading as the miles passed beneath Caesar's steady hooves. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple meal. Garrett had more supplies than Harper had expected, and she realized he must have been planning to be out for several days searching for that lost calf. They sat in the shade of a large rock formation, passing the canteen back and forth. "Tell me about St. Louis," Garrett said, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I have never been east of the Mississippi." So Harper told him about the city, about the great river that dominated everything, about the society parties her mother had insisted she attend, about the young men who had courted her with elaborate manners and empty promises. She told him about the cholera outbreak that had taken her father when she was 15, and the slow decline of their circumstances afterward as her mother tried to maintain appearances on a dwindling inheritance. "She died in the winter," Harper said, surprised at how easily the words came. "Pneumonia. I think part of her just gave up. She had spent so much energy trying to secure my future through marriage, and when no offers came, she felt she had failed. But the truth was, I had turned them all down. None of them saw me as anything more than a decorative object to display in their homes." Garrett nodded slowly. "Cannot say I understand society people. Out here, a person is judged by what they can do, not who their parents were or how much money they inherited. A woman who can manage a ranch or run a boarding house or doctor the sick is worth more than all the fancy manners in the world. Is that why you came west? Part of it. Also, the sky is bigger here. I like having room to breathe." They reached Castle Dome in the late afternoon, the small mining town spread out along a creek that ran down from the mountains. It was a rough place. Harper could see that immediately, all raw lumber and canvas tents and men covered in copper dust. But there was also a certain vitality to it, an energy that spoke of people building something new. Garrett guided Caesar through the main street, such as it was, drawing curious looks from miners and merchants alike. Harper was acutely aware of what they must look like, her disheveled and wearing a horse blanket, him dusty from the trail. But Garrett seemed unconcerned with appearances, and his confidence bolstered her own. Margaret Preston's boarding house sat on the edge of town, a proper wooden structure with a covered porch and curtains in the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Harper could smell bread baking, a scent so comforting it made her throat tight. Garrett dismounted and helped Harper down, steadying her when her legs proved unsteady after hours in the saddle. "You are all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, just tired." He nodded, then walked with her to the front door. Before they could knock, it flew open, and a woman in her 50s stood there, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. She had Harper's mother's eyes, bright blue and sharp, and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Harper," Aunt Margaret's voice cracked on the name. "Lord above, is that really you?" "Hello, Aunt Margaret," Harper said, and then found herself engulfed in a fierce hug that smelled of bread and soap and safety. Margaret pulled back, holding Harper at arm's length, her eyes scanning her niece with the thoroughness of a general inspecting troops. "You look half-starved and rode hard. Where have you been? I expected you weeks ago. I have been worried sick. It is a long story." Margaret's gaze shifted to Garrett, who had stepped back politely. "And who is this?" "Garrett Irving, madam. I work for the Copper Queen." "Found your niece out in the desert with a dead fire and thought I would see her safely to your door." Margaret's expression softened. "Garrett Irving, you are one of John's cowboys, are you not? Come around here for pie sometimes." "Yes, madam. Best pie in the territory." "Flattery will get you everywhere, young man. Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use a proper meal." Margaret ushered them into the boarding house, which was clean and comfortable, with mismatched furniture that somehow all worked together. The smell of baking bread was stronger inside, and Harper's stomach growled audibly. "Let me get you settled," Margaret said, already moving toward the kitchen. "Garrett, you will stay for supper. I insist. It is the least I can do for bringing my niece home safe." "I should get back to the ranch," Garrett protested, but it was a weak protest. "Nonsense. It is nearly evening and that horse of yours needs rest. You can stay the night if you want or ride back with a full stomach and my gratitude. Harper, go upstairs and wash up. Second door on the right. I have been keeping a room ready for you." Harper looked at Garrett, suddenly not wanting him to leave, though she could not have explained why. "Will you stay for supper?" Something in her voice must have reached him because his expression softened. "Yes, Miss Preston, I will stay for supper." The meal was the best Harper had eaten in months. Margaret served pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and a pie made from preserved peaches. They ate at a large table that could seat 12. Though it was just the three of them that evening, the other boarders still at work in the mines. Over dinner, Harper told her aunt about her journey, though she downplayed the worst parts, not wanting to worry her. Margaret listened with the fierce attention she gave everything, occasionally interjecting with questions or comments. Garrett ate quietly, but Harper noticed him watching her, and whenever their eyes met, she felt that strange skip in her heartbeat again. After dinner, Margaret shooed them both out to the porch while she cleaned up, ignoring their offers of help. "You two have had a long day. Go sit and watch the sunset. It is the best thing about this place." So Harper and Garrett found themselves on the porch, sitting in rocking chairs that looked out over the dusty street and toward the mountains beyond. The sky was turning colors that Harper had never seen in St. Louis, great sweeps of orange and pink and purple that seemed to set the whole world on fire. "Thank you," Harper said quietly, "for everything. I would have frozen last night if you had not found me." "You would have figured something out," Garrett said. "You are tougher than you think." "I do not feel tough. Tough is not the same as hard. You made it all the way from St. Louis to Arizona Territory by yourself. That takes a kind of strength that most people do not have." He rocked slowly, his gaze on the mountains. "What will you do now?" "I suppose I will stay here. Help Aunt Margaret with the boarding house. Try to make myself useful." Even as she said it, Harper felt a hollowness in her chest. It was a plan, a future, but it felt like someone else's plan, someone else's future. Garrett must have heard something in her voice because he turned to look at her. "But is that what you want?" "I do not know what I want. I have never known what I want. I only know what I am supposed to want. Maybe it is time to figure it out." They sat in silence as the sun sank lower, and Harper felt something shifting inside her, like a door opening in a room she had not known existed. Garrett represented something she had not encountered before. Someone who seemed to see her as a whole person, not a problem to solve or a piece to be moved around on someone else's board. When Garrett finally stood to leave, Margaret came out and pressed a cloth-wrapped package into his hands. "Pie for the road," she said firmly, "and thank you for taking care of my girl." "It was my pleasure, madam." Garrett turned to Harper, and for a moment she thought he might say something more, but he just touched the brim of his hat. "Be well, Miss Preston." Harper watched him ride away until he disappeared into the twilight, and the hollow feeling in her chest grew larger. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Margaret put Harper to work immediately, and Harper discovered she had a knack for organization and numbers that served the boarding house well. She took over the bookkeeping, managed the supply orders, and even learned to cook some of the simpler meals. The work was hard, but it was also satisfying in a way she had not expected. The boarders were an interesting mix of miners, cowboys, and occasional prospectors passing through. Most were polite, a few were rough, but Margaret ran a tight establishment, and everyone knew the rules. Harper learned to navigate the social dynamics, to deflect unwanted attention with firm politeness, and to tell the difference between men who were dangerous and men who were just lonely. But despite the busy days and the satisfaction of useful work, Harper found her thoughts returning again and again to Garrett Irving. She caught herself watching for him whenever riders passed through town, hoping to see his tall figure on the dark horse. Margaret noticed, of course, because Margaret noticed everything. "That cowboy made quite an impression," her aunt observed one morning as they kneaded bread together. "I am just grateful to him," Harper said, focusing very intently on the dough. "Hum. And I am just a simple boarding house keeper with no understanding of the ways of the heart." Margaret's voice was dry. "Harper, honey, I have been watching people fall in love in this house for 10 years. I know what it looks like." Harper felt her cheeks heat. "I barely know him." "Sometimes that does not matter. Sometimes you meet someone and they just fit, like they are the answer to a question you did not know you were asking." Margaret shaped her dough into a loaf with practiced efficiency. "Your uncle and I met on a wagon train heading west. He fixed my father's wagon wheel, and I knew before he even stood up that I was going to marry him. We had 6 months together before he died in a mining accident, and I have never regretted a single day. I did not know that. Most people do not. I do not talk about it much. But I am telling you now because I see something in your eyes that I remember from my own mirror, 30 years ago. Do not waste time being afraid, Harper. Life is too short and too uncertain for that." Before Harper could respond, the front door opened and one of the regular boarders, a young miner named Tom, stuck his head in. "Miss Margaret, there is a rider coming in fast. Looks like trouble." They went outside to find a small crowd gathering on the street. A cowboy Harper did not recognize was dismounting from a lathered horse, calling out for the doctor. "Accident at the Copper Queen. Man fell from his horse and got dragged. We need Dr. Morrison." Harper's heart seized in her chest. "Who was it?" she called out before she could stop herself. What is his name? The cowboy looked at her, confused by the intensity in her voice. Garrett Irving. He is bad, miss. Real bad. The world tilted sideways. Harper heard Margaret calling her name, but it sounded distant, muffled. She gripped the porch railing, forcing herself to breathe. Where is he? They are bringing him into town now. Should be here within the hour. Harper turned to her aunt. I need to help. Of course you do, Margaret said gently. Come on. Let us go to the doctor's office and see what we can do. Dr. Morrison's office was a small building near the center of town, part surgery and part pharmacy. The doctor himself was a weathered man in his 60s who had seen more injuries than most battlefield surgeons. He was already preparing his instruments when Margaret and Harper arrived. I heard, he said tersely. Tom ran ahead to warn me if this boy was dragged I will need all the help I can get. Margaret, can you assist? Of course. And Harper here has steady hands and a strong stomach. We will both help. Morrison nodded. Get water boiling. Tear clean sheets into bandages. And prepare yourselves. This will not be pretty. They were as ready as they could be when the wagon arrived, carrying Garrett's still form. 4 cowboys lifted him carefully and carried him into the surgery, laying him on the table as gently as they could. Harper got her first look at him and had to swallow hard against the nausea that rose in her throat. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his face scraped raw on one side. His left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and blood seeped from a dozen lacerations. But worst was his stillness. The vital, confident man she had met in the desert looked like a broken doll. Everyone out except my assistants, Morrison barked. The cowboys filed out reluctantly, their faces grim. For the next 3 hours, Harper learned what it meant to help save a life. Morrison worked with swift, sure movements, cleaning wounds, setting the broken arm, stitching the worst of the cuts. Margaret assisted with the competence of someone who had done this before, and Harper followed their instructions, fetching supplies, holding bandages, doing whatever was needed. Garrett never fully regained consciousness, though he moaned occasionally and once cried out when Morrison reset his arm. Harper found herself talking to him in a low voice, saying things she barely registered, just trying to reach him somehow, to pull him back from wherever he had gone. That is all I can do for now, Morrison said finally, washing blood from his hands in a basin. The breaks are set, the wounds are clean. Now we wait and pray infection does not set in. The next few days will tell us if he is going to make it. Can we move him? Margaret asked. Not far. He needs to stay still. We have a room on the first floor at the boarding house. It is closer than the ranch and we can watch over him properly. I will not charge the Copper Queen. Morrison nodded. That would be best. I will check on him twice a day. You know the signs to watch for, Margaret. I do. They moved Garrett to the boarding house as the sun was setting, settling him into a small room that Margaret usually reserved for miners who could afford a private space. Harper helped make him comfortable, changing his bandages and covering him with clean blankets. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his color was better than it had been. You should rest, Margaret said, putting a hand on Harper's shoulder. This is not your burden to carry alone. I cannot rest, not yet. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I will bring you coffee and something to eat. But Harper, you need to understand something. We can do everything right and he still might not make it. Men die from injuries like this. You need to prepare yourself. I know. But Harper did not prepare herself. Instead, she sat in the chair beside Garrett's bed and began her vigil. She read to him from the few books in the house. She told him stories about St. Louis, about her journey west, about the borders and their quirks. She changed his bandages when they needed changing and held water to his lips when he was conscious enough to drink. Margaret took over for a few hours each day, forcing Harper to sleep and eat. But the rest of the time, Harper was there, watching over the man who had saved her life and somehow, in one night and one day, had become essential to her existence. On the third day, Garrett opened his eyes and looked at her with clear recognition. "Miss Preston," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you real, or am I dead and this is heaven?" Harper felt tears streaming down her face before she even registered that she was crying. "You are not dead, you stubborn man, but you came close enough to scare 10 years off my life." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Sorry about that. You should be sorry. What happened?" "Horse spooked. Snake, I think. Foot caught in the stirrup when I fell." He tried to move and grimaced. "Feel like I was dragged across the desert." "That is because you were dragged across the desert. You have a broken arm, more stitches than I can count, and Dr. Morrison says you are lucky to be alive." "Lucky," Garrett repeated, then his eyes focused on her more fully. "Why are you crying?" Harper wiped at her face, embarrassed. "Because you frightened me. Did not mean to. I know." She took his good hand without thinking, and his fingers curled weakly around hers. "You need to rest now. Build your strength back. Will you be here when I wake up?" "Yes, promise. I promise." He closed his eyes, and within moments his breathing evened out into sleep. But his hand remained in hers, and Harper did not let go. Garrett's recovery was slow but steady. By the end of the first week, he could sit up with help. By the end of the second, he was arguing with Dr. Morrison about when he could leave bed, though the doctor had firmly told him it would be at least another month before he could think about riding. "A month," Garrett protested to Harper one afternoon as she brought him lunch. "I will go mad sitting in this room for a month." "Then I suppose you will go mad," Harper said, setting the tray across his lap. "Because the alternative is you re-injuring yourself and spending even longer in that bed. You have gotten bossy. I learned from my aunt. Now eat your soup before it gets cold." Garrett grumbled but obeyed, and Harper settled into the chair she had come to think of as hers. Their dynamic had shifted over the past 2 weeks. The formality had burned away in the crucible of fear and care, leaving something more genuine in its place. "Tell me something," Garrett said, setting down his spoon. "Why did you stay with me? Margaret could have hired someone to nurse me. You did not owe me anything." Harper was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for feelings she barely understood herself. "Do you remember that night in the desert? You said the desert is harsh but honest, that it does not pretend to be something it is not." "I remember. I think people can be that way too, and you were. You helped me because I needed help, not because you wanted something from me or because it was proper. Just because it was the right thing to do. I have never met anyone like that before." She met his eyes. "And when I heard you were hurt, I realized that in one night you had become more important to me than people I have known my whole life. So I stayed because I could not imagine being anywhere else." Garrett was very still, his food forgotten. "Harper." It was the first time he had used her given name without the title, and the sound of it in his voice made her heart race. "I need to tell you something," he said slowly. "And I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything, because if I do not get it all out, I might lose my courage." Harper nodded, barely breathing. "I have been dragged by a horse before. Had my ribs kicked in by a steer, broke my leg in a fall, and had more close calls than I can count. That is the life of a cowboy. I always figured I would die young and probably stupid, doing something reckless because I was too stubborn to be careful." He paused. "But when I woke up and saw you sitting there, looking like you had not slept in days, crying because I was alive, something changed. I realized I did not want to die young and stupid. I wanted to live whatever it takes because you are here." "Garrett," Harper whispered. "Let me finish," he said. "I do not have much to offer. I am a cowboy who lives in a bunkhouse and makes $40 a month when the work is good. I do not have land or prospects or any of the things a woman like you should expect. But I am in love with you, Harper Preston. And I have been since that night in the desert when you tried to tell me you did not need help while shaking so hard you could barely stand. You are brave and stubborn and stronger than you know, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are capable of anything you set your mind to. Harper felt more tears sliding down her face, but these were different from the tears of fear she had shed when Garrett was brought in. These were tears of joy, of relief, of rightness. "Are you going to say something?" Garrett asked, his voice uncertain. "Because I am dying here, and I have already almost died once this month, which seems like enough." Harper laughed through her tears, a sound that was half sob. "I am in love with you too," she said. "I think I have been since you built that fire and told me pride makes poor fuel. And I do not care that you are a cowboy who lives in a bunkhouse. I do not want what I am supposed to want anymore. I just want you." Garrett's face broke into a smile so bright it transformed him. "Come here," he said, reaching for her with his good arm. Harper leaned forward and he cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. Then he kissed her, gentle and careful and full of promise. It was Harper's first kiss, and it tasted like hope and home and everything she had been searching for without knowing. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you, Harper Preston, just as soon as I can stand up without falling over." "That is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard," Harper said, but she was smiling. "Give me time. I will get better at it. I am going to hold you to that." The door opened and Margaret stuck her head in, took one look at them, and smiled. "I thought I heard laughing. I take it you two finally stopped dancing around the obvious." "We did," Harper confirmed. "Good. It was exhausting to watch." "Garrett, you finish your soup. Harper, come help me with dinner. And both of you remember that this is a respectable boarding house, so doors stay open and behavior stays proper until there is a ring involved." "Yes, madam," they said in unison, and Margaret retreated, still smiling. Garrett squeezed Harper's hand. "Your aunt is terrifying." "She is, but she likes you, which means you have a chance." Over the next few weeks, Garrett continued to heal and their relationship deepened. When he was well enough to walk with a cane, he began joining the family for meals, charming Margaret and scandalizing some of the more conservative boarders with his frank manner and obvious devotion to Harper. The two of them spent long evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of a life together. Garrett wrote to his family in Texas, telling them about Harper and his plans to marry. The response came 6 weeks later, a thick letter from his mother full of questions and congratulations and demands to meet this woman who had captured her son's heart. His siblings added their own notes, teasing and warm, welcoming Harper to the family before they had even met her. Harper had no family to write to, but she did not need one. Margaret was all the family she needed, and her aunt's approval meant everything. As Garrett's strength returned, so did his plans for the future. He could not go back to the simple life of a ranch hand, not with a wife to support and a family to build. So he began looking at land, scraping together every dollar he had saved and making inquiries about homesteading claims. "There is a stretch of land about 10 miles north of here," he told Harper one evening in December, spreading a rough map on the kitchen table. "It has water, decent grazing, and enough flat land to build a house. I talked to the land office and I can file a claim. It will not be easy. We will have to live in a tent or a sod house at first while I build something proper, and money will be tight for years. But it would be ours." Harper studied the map, her heart pounding. A homestead meant hard work and uncertainty, but it also meant freedom and possibility. It meant building something that belonged to them, not living by someone else's rules or plans. "When can we start?" she asked. Garrett looked at her, his expression fierce with love. "Are you sure? This is not the life you were raised for." "I was not raised for any life that matters. But I can learn. We can learn together." He pulled her into his arms, careful of his still healing injuries. "Then we start as soon as we are married. I already talked to the preacher. He says he can perform the ceremony any time we are ready." "What about your family? Do you not want them here?" Garrett shook his head. "I will take you to meet them someday, but I do not want to wait. I have been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it. I do not want to wait any more." They were married on a cold January morning in 1883 in Margaret's parlor, with Dr. Morrison and a handful of the boarders as witnesses. Harper wore a simple dress that Margaret had altered for her, and Garrett wore his best shirt and a new vest that he had spent a month's wages on. The ceremony was short and practical, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Garrett kissed her, Harper felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and wonderful. Margaret gave them a wedding breakfast and cried through the whole thing, then pressed a small bag of gold coins into Harper's hand. "Your mother sent this to me before she died," she said. "She wanted you to have it when you married. It is not much, but it will help you get started." Harper threw her arms around her aunt. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for helping us, for believing in me when I did not believe in myself. You did the hard part, honey. You took the chance. Now go build that life you have been looking for." They left Castle Dome the next morning, riding double on Caesar, their few belongings packed behind them. The land Garrett had claimed was a stretch of high desert backed against rocky hills, with a creek that ran year-round and cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. It was harsh and beautiful and entirely theirs. They lived in a canvas tent that first month while Garrett began building their house. Harper learned to cook over an open fire, to wash clothes in the creek, to identify which plants were edible and which would kill you. She learned to handle a rifle, to watch for snakes and scorpions, to read the sky for weather changes. The work was harder than anything she had ever done, but it was also more satisfying. Each stone they laid, each board they nailed, each fence post they set was a piece of their future taking solid form. By the time spring arrived, they had a small house with 2 rooms and a porch, a corral for horses, and a chicken coop that Harper had insisted on despite Garrett's protests that chickens were more trouble than they were worth. "We need eggs," Harper had argued. "And I am tired of eating nothing but beans and jerky." She had been right, of course. The chickens were trouble, but they also provided eggs and eventually meat, and Harper discovered she had a talent for managing them. They acquired more animals slowly, as they could afford them. A milk cow named Rosie, 2 horses besides Caesar. Eventually, a small herd of cattle that Garrett built up through careful trading and one very good poker game in town. Life was not easy. There were droughts that withered their garden and forced them to ration water. There were winter storms that tested the strength of their house and their resolve. There were illnesses and accidents, loneliness and disagreements. But there was also joy, deep and sustaining, in the life they were building together. On a hot day in August, Harper was working in the garden when a wave of dizziness forced her to sit down abruptly. Garrett was there in an instant, his face concerned. "What is wrong? Are you sick?" "I do not think sick is the right word," Harper said slowly, her hand going to her stomach. "Garrett, I think I am pregnant." His eyes went wide, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the chickens half to death. He picked Harper up and spun her around, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby," Harper confirmed. And then she was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. Their son was born the following April, a long and difficult labor that had Garrett pacing outside while Margaret, who had ridden out from Castle Dome, attended to Harper. When it was finally over and Margaret placed the squalling infant in Harper's arms, Harper looked down at his red face and dark hair and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is loud," Garrett said, but his voice was choked with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed, one finger gently touching the baby's tiny hand. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, but suddenly, looking at her son, Harper knew. "James, after your father." Garrett's eyes filled with tears. "James Irving, he would have liked that." James was followed by twin girls 2 years later, Rachel and Ruth, who kept Harper and Garrett running from dawn until long after dark. Then another boy, Samuel, 3 years after that. Their house grew room by room to accommodate their expanding family, and their land grew too as they proved up their homestead claim and acquired adjacent parcels. The years were full, sometimes chaotic, but always rich with love. Garrett proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, teaching his sons to ride and his daughters to be fearless. Harper discovered reserves of strength and patience she had never known she possessed, managing a household and helping with the ranch work when Garrett needed an extra pair of hands. They made trips to Castle Dome regularly, bringing the children to visit Margaret, who spoiled them outrageously and sent them home with cookies and hand-knitted sweaters. They traveled to Texas twice, once when James was 3 and again 5 years later, and Harper fell in love with Garrett's family as thoroughly as she had fallen in love with him. His mother reminded Harper of Margaret, strong and practical and full of quiet wisdom. His siblings welcomed her and the children with open arms, and the cousins became fast friends despite seeing each other so rarely. There were hard times too. A particularly brutal winter when they lost half their herd and had to rebuild from almost nothing. An accident when Samuel was 6 that left him with a scar on his forehead, and Harper with gray hair she swore appeared overnight from fear. The death of Margaret when Harper was 32, a loss that left a hole in her heart that never fully healed. But through it all, there was Garrett. Steady, strong, loving Garrett, who still looked at Harper like she was the answer to every question that mattered, who still made her laugh even when times were hardest, who had kept every promise he made that January morning when he told her he wanted to spend his life proving she was capable of anything. On a spring evening 23 years after the night Garrett found Harper shivering by a dead fire, they sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in colors that still took Harper's breath away. Their children were scattered, James working with his father, the twins somewhere nearby giggling over some private joke, Samuel trying to teach the newest batch of puppies to behave. "You ever regret it?" Harper asked, taking Garrett's hand in hers. It was a familiar question, one they asked each other sometimes, not because they doubted but because the answer was always a reaffirmation of the choice they had made. "Not once," Garrett said firmly. "You? Never. Though I sometimes cannot believe that scared, half-frozen girl who could not even keep a fire going became this." She gestured at the ranch, at their life spread out before them. "I can believe it. I saw what you were from the start. You just needed the chance to see it yourself." He pulled her close, and she leaned against his shoulder, fitting there as perfectly as she had 20 years ago. "Besides, you still cannot keep a fire going worth a damn. You are lucky you married someone useful." Harper laughed and elbowed him gently. "I have other skills." "That you do," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. From inside the house came the sounds of their children arguing amiably over supper preparations, a familiar symphony of family life. The air smelled of desert flowers and the creek and home. "Thank you," Harper said softly. "For what? For building me a fire, for staying, for seeing me when I did not even see myself." Garrett turned her face toward his and kissed her, gentle and thorough and full of 23 years of love. "I did not stay for you, Harper Irving. I stayed for us, for this, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Even knowing how stubborn I am, especially knowing how stubborn you are. It is one of your best qualities." She laughed again, the sound carrying across the desert evening, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Harper thought about that young woman who had left St. Louis chasing someone else's dream of California, how lost she had been, how uncertain. She thought about the freezing night in the canyon when her fire had died, and she had been sure she would die with it. She had been wrong about so many things back then. But the desert had taught her, and Garrett had loved her, and together they had built a life that was entirely their own. Not the life she had been raised to want, but the life she had learned to choose, and it was more than enough. It was everything. Inside, Samuel called that supper was ready, and James came around the corner of the house, dusty and tired but grinning. The twins appeared from wherever they had been hiding, carrying wildflowers they had picked. The family gathered, as they did every evening. Around the table, Garrett had built with his own hands in the house they had raised together on land they had claimed from the wilderness. As Harper looked around at the faces of her husband and children, at the life they had created from nothing but determination and love, she felt a peace so profound it was almost like prayer. She had traveled thousands of miles to find her home, but in the end, home had not been a place at all. It had been Garrett, and the life they had chosen to build together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one fire at a time. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Harper and Garrett lay together in their bed, the windows open to let in the cool desert air. Garrett's arm was around her, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me again," she murmured, half asleep. "Tell you what?" His voice rumbled in his chest. "How you knew, that night in the canyon. How did you know to stay?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair gently. "I did not know anything for certain, but I looked at you, shivering and proud and refusing to admit you needed help, and something in me recognized something in you, like we were two pieces of the same puzzle. So I stayed because leaving felt impossible, and staying felt like the only choice that made sense. I am glad you stayed. So am I, love, so am I." They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the certain knowledge that they had found what so few people ever did. A love that was worth the hardship, a partner who was worth the struggle, and a life together that was worth every sacrifice it took to build it. Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. James eventually married a schoolteacher from Tucson, a smart woman named Alina who won Harper's heart by standing up to her son when he was being stubborn. The twins married brothers from a neighboring ranch, a coincidence that became family legend. Samuel took after his father, devoted to the land and the animals, eventually taking over more and more of the daily ranch operations as Garrett's hair turned gray. Harper expanded her interests beyond the ranch, helping establish a school in the area and working with other ranch wives to create a lending library that served families scattered across miles of desert. She wrote long letters to Garrett's family in Texas and received equally long letters in return, maintaining connections across the distance. Grandchildren came, a whole new generation to love and spoil. Harper taught her granddaughters to read and to question and to believe in their own strength, just as Margaret had taught her. Garrett taught the grandsons to ride and rope and to treat women with respect, passing down the lessons his own father had given him. The ranch prospered, not making them wealthy but providing a good, solid living. They weathered economic downturns and droughts, using the resilience they had built in those first hard years to see them through. The house was expanded again, gaining a proper parlor and more bedrooms, though Harper insisted they keep the original 2 rooms exactly as they were, a reminder of where they had started. On their 30th anniversary, Garrett surprised Harper by taking her back to the canyon where they had first met. They rode out together, older now but still strong, and made camp in the same spot where Harper had shivered by a dead fire so many years before. "I thought we should come back," Garrett said as he built a fire with the same efficient movements Harper had watched that long-ago night. "Remember where we started." Harper watched the flames catch and grow, remembering how impossible warmth had seemed, how lost she had felt. "I was so frightened that night, not just of the cold but of everything, the future, the past, myself most of all. And now I am still frightened sometimes," she admitted. "But not of the big things, just the normal fears that our children will be happy, that our grandchildren will grow up safe, that I will lose you." Garrett came to sit beside her, pulling her into his arms. "You are not losing me anytime soon. I plan to be around long enough to be a great-grandfather and to drive you completely mad with my stubbornness." "You already drive me mad with your stubbornness. And you love it." She did. She loved all of him, even the parts that frustrated her, because those parts were inseparable from the parts she treasured most. They spent the night under the stars, talking and laughing and remembering. And when morning came, they rode back to the ranch and to their life, grateful for the chance to revisit their beginning, but even more grateful for everything that had come after. More years passed. Harper's hair turned white, and Garrett moved a little slower, but they were still strong, still active in the life of the ranch and their community. They saw Arizona achieve statehood in 1912. A momentous occasion that felt like vindication for all the pioneers who had built lives in the harsh desert territory. Their children thrived, giving them a dozen grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under Samuel's management, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values of hard work and integrity that Garrett and Harper had established. On a warm evening in the spring of 1915, 33 years after Garrett had found Harper by that dead fire, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Harper was 70 now, Garrett 72, but they still held hands like young lovers, still found comfort in each other's presence. "I have been thinking," Harper said, watching the familiar sunset paint the sky. "About what?" "About writing it all down, our story. Not for anyone else particularly, but for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So they know where they came from. So they understand that even when things seem impossible, even when you are frozen and alone and your fire has gone out, it can get better. It can become more than you ever imagined." Garrett squeezed her hand. "I think that is a fine idea, though you will have to do the writing. My hands are not steady enough anymore. My hands are not much better, but I will manage. I always do." "Yes, you do." He looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown since the beginning. "You know what I remember most about that night?" "What?" "How brave you were. How you tried to send me away even though you were clearly in trouble. And I remember thinking that any woman that stubborn deserved to live, just so the world could see what she would do with a second chance. And what do you think I did with it? You built an empire, raised a family, became the strongest person I know, changed my entire life just by existing. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I think you exceeded all expectations, Harper Irving." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, still her anchor after all these years. "We did it together. The best things always are." They sat in peaceful silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. From inside the house came the sounds of family. Samuel's wife preparing supper, grandchildren visiting, the hum of life continuing. Harper closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of gratitude for this life she had been given, for the chance encounter that had saved her life and given her everything that mattered, for the man who had stayed when he could have ridden away, for the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of joy and struggle. When she opened her eyes, Garrett was watching her, his weathered face soft with affection. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I would do it all again. Every hard moment, every scared night, every time I wanted to give up. I would do it all again just to end up here with you, with this life we built. Even that first night when you were convinced you were going to freeze to death, especially that night. Because that was the night everything changed. That was the night I met you." Garrett pulled her closer, and they stayed like that as darkness fell complete and the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life worth every moment. And it had all started with a dead fire, a cowboy who stopped to help, and the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. In the end, Harper did write their story, filling pages with her careful script, documenting not just the dramatic moments but the small, daily acts of love that had sustained them. She wrote about the challenges and the triumphs, the children and the ranch, the life they had carved from the wilderness through sheer determination and love. She gave copies to each of her children and tucked the original away in a wooden box that Garrett had made for her, alongside their wedding certificate and the pressed flowers from her first Arizona spring. Garrett lived to see their 51st anniversary, still sharp-minded and loving until the end, passing peacefully in his sleep with Harper's hand in his. Harper mourned him deeply, but she did not break. She had learned too much strength over the years for that. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family, for another 3 years before joining him. On the day she died, at 73, she was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and the family swore that her last word was his name, spoken with joy and recognition, as if she could see him waiting for her just beyond the fading light. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Arizona sky they had both loved. And the family they had created continued on, generation after generation, building on the foundation of love and resilience that Garrett and Harper had established. The story of the cowboy who found a woman shivering by a dead fire, built her a new one, and stayed became family legend, passed down through the years as a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest acts of kindness, and that love, real love, is worth every sacrifice it takes to build it. And in the end, that was the true miracle. Not that Garrett had stayed that first night, though that was remarkable enough, but that he had kept staying, day after day, year after year, building a life with Harper that neither of them could have imagined when they first met in that cold canyon under indifferent stars. They had taken a moment of chance and turned it into a lifetime of choice, proving that the strongest fires are not the ones that burn brightest at first, but the ones that are tended carefully and fed constantly and protected fiercely, until they become something that cannot be extinguished. Their descendants carried that lesson forward, each generation adding their own stories to the family history, but always looking back to Garrett and Harper as the beginning, the foundation, the proof that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The ranch itself continued for over 100 years, eventually becoming a landmark in Arizona history. The original house was preserved, and visitors could still see the two small rooms where Garrett and Harper had started their married life, could stand on the porch where they had watched thousands of sunsets together, could walk the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. But more than the physical legacy, Garrett and Harper left behind something more valuable. A story of hope, of second chances, of finding love in unexpected places and building a life from nothing but determination and devotion. It was a story that began with cold and fear and uncertainty, and ended with warmth and love and a family that stretched across generations. A story that proved that sometimes the simplest act of human kindness, a cowboy building a fire for a stranger, can change the entire course of a life. And maybe that was the point all along, that we never know which small act of compassion might become the cornerstone of someone else's happiness. That staying when we could leave, helping when we could walk away, might be the thing that transforms not just one life but many lives extending far into the future. Garrett stayed because it was the right thing to do, and in staying, he found everything he had been searching for without knowing it. Harper accepted his help because she had no choice, and in accepting, she opened herself to a future she never could have imagined. Together, they proved that the Wild West was not just a place of danger and hardship, but also a place of opportunity and rebirth, where people could shed their past mistakes and become whoever they had the courage to be. Their love story became the foundation for dozens of other love stories, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all carrying forward the lessons of strength and devotion that Garrett and Harper had modeled so perfectly. And though many years have passed since that cold night in October of 1882, when a cowboy found a woman shivering by a dead fire, built her a new one, and stayed, the warmth of that fire still burns in the hearts of all who descend from them, a reminder that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth staying for, no matter how uncertain the future might seem.